All right, guys. So, in any good beginner's curriculum, I feel like you have to start with mount escapes. As a beginner, you're going to get stuck in bottom mount position quite frequently. So, I think building a solid game plan from bottom position is very essential. So, what we're going to look at is a simple bridge and shrimp escape, and use that to combine with a leg trap or a knee elbow escape back to half guard and eventually back to closed guard. I think that these two escapes work really well together because it's sort of like a jab cross in the regard that when you go for a bridge and shrimp escape, typically the people will, or your training partner will counter that by putting their weight on the opposite leg, and when they do that, they open themselves up to a leg trap escape or a knee elbow escape. So let's get into it. All right, so starting with good positioning for a bridge. Although these movements don't seem too spectacular, they're very fundamental. It's good to develop a strong technical bridge from bottom position. So, bringing our heels in nice and tight to the tailbone is going to give us the most power from our hips possible. The further our heels are from our tailbone, the less amplitude we'll be able to get out of our bridge, meaning the height of our bridge will be reduced, as well as the overall power that we can generate with our hips. So we really want to bring those heels in nice and tight to that tailbone to start. So once I've started my bridge, you'll notice that I'm bridging up and over top of a shoulder and not just directly up and down, like a more traditional bridge as most people would think of it. The purpose of this is I'm trying to take my partner's center of gravity and move it off of my center of gravity. So if we were to bridge directly up and down in a straight line vertically, I'm just lifting my partner's center of gravity up above my hips or my center of gravity and then dropping them right back down. So I'm not really causing any displacement of my partner's center of gravity whatsoever, which means it's going to be fairly easy for them to maintain the mount position. But when I bridge up and over my shoulder, as you'll see when we start looking at it with a training partner, I'm moving their center of gravity offline with my center of gravity. And that's really where my partner is going to be off balance. They're going to have to reach out to stop themselves from falling over. And these are the kind of reactions that we're looking to get to make them put their weight on one side of their body as opposed to being very stable on either side of our body. So I've bridged up high and over top of that shoulder. As a final detail, you can test this yourself, but you get a little bit more amplitude out of your bridge if you look over the shoulder, right? It's very tempting to stare at your partner, especially as a beginner, to look directly at your training partner while you're training. It's a good temptation, but looking over your shoulder will get you just a little bit more height out of your bridge and make it a little more powerful. Now, common mistake here is beginners will have their feet too close together and they don't keep their weight evenly distributed between the feet. So they'll fall over when they go to do this big bridge over the shoulder. And we really want to avoid that happening because then we're essentially just giving our partner some back exposure and the ability to maintain the mount. So when you bridge up over that shoulder, make sure you're strong on both feet. You have them both planted strong on the mat. We're twisting at the torso, but you'll notice if you take a look at my knees and the top of my legs, they're still very square, very strong positioning on the mat. It's my upper body that's twisting and a slight twist in my hips to take their center of gravity off of my center line. All right, so now we're setting up for our shrimping motion. Now, usually the bridge and shrimp will be used in combination, as you'll see later when we work on it with a training partner. I'll usually bridge to take their center of gravity off of mine, and then I shrimp out, taking advantage of the fact that they're catching their weight and maintaining top position as best they can. But for now, we're breaking it up into individual pieces. So when I start my shrimp, I roll to my side from that bridging position. And you'll notice that I still keep the heels nice and tight to the butt, but now I'm using the edge of my bottom foot. So kind of my pinky toe, maybe a couple of my toes are engaged on the outside of my foot. My other foot is still engaged with the mat. Sometimes you'll see people shrimp with one leg. I feel like you can generate better power engaging both legs with the mat as opposed to just using one leg to shrimp. So I like to keep all my toes on both feet as much as possible engaged with the mat, and I'm actually turning my toes down towards the mat on the bottom leg just to get as much bite on the mat surface as possible. You'll also notice that I made a very small adjustment at the very end there, which is to take the weight off of my hips. So right now, it's hard to tell, but my weight is distributed between my 2 feet and my one shoulder, my left shoulder. All right, that way I'm removing as much friction from the mat as possible, and that's going to make the shrimping motion a lot easier, especially when I have someone on top of me. Just that brief second where my hips aren't dragging on the mat is going to reduce a lot of the friction and give me the ability to shrimp far more efficiently, and get a little bit extra movement out of my hips. So that's how I would set up for the shrimp. Feet on the mat, toes turned down towards the mat. We're taking the weight off of our hips, putting it on our shoulder, and getting ready to shrimp. All right, so when I perform the shrimp, you'll notice that it's about hip movement more than anything. I'm pivoting on that left shoulder, moving my hips backwards, and my head will even move towards my feet slightly. A good rule of thumb is like at your gym, if you have lines on the mats like ours do, what I often tell people is to try to pick a line and shrimp along that line so that that your center of gravity, which is located roughly in the center of your hips, that center of gravity moves along a straight line. Right? A lot of people make a mistake that when they shrimp, they'll kind of go in circles if they keep shrimping over and over again. And what you'll see in a second here is that when I shrimp, I'm moving in a straight line. So it's a linear movement, not so much a rotational movement. And that's important to nail down as a beginner because that's what's going to get you out from underneath a partner's hips. If I'm moving in a circle, it's very easy for them to just follow me in that circular line. I move linearly away from my partner's hips. Very easy to get my body weight or my center of gravity out from their center of gravity. And then I could use my legs to assist with the rest of the escape, as you'll see later. When I reset after a shrimp, sometimes you're going to try to shrimp. You're not going to get out the first time. You're going to need to go again. Right? I move my body backwards. Okay, so I've shrimped my hips back. Now I move my upper body backwards, bring my feet in nice and tight to my tailbone again, and reset the position by taking my weight off the hips, and I'm ready to shrimp again. I'll also keep my hands in front of me, pretending as if someone's in front of me the entire time. Just a good habit to get into while you're practicing your shrimps. We'll talk more about framing in a minute. All right, so now we're under our partner working from bottom mount position. One of the first things we need to do is do a little bit of housekeeping on our bottom mount position to make sure that we generally stay safe from bottom mount. It can be very tempting as a beginner to reach up, push on your partner's chest, grab their arms, hug their body, etc. All of these things against a trained jiu-jitsu athlete are going to get you submitted very quickly. We want to keep our arms safe, our elbows in nice and tight to our body. If you look at my left arm right now, you can see that my elbow's tucked inside my partner's knee. All right. I don't want to allow him to bring his knees high under my armpits. Right. If I could have it my way right now, my right arm would be even tighter to my body as well, and I wouldn't have allowed his leg under my right arm. But you'll see in a second, we're setting up for a good bridge. Luke, being a very skilled blue belt, has taken that opportunity on me, as he'll take whenever it's possible, to get a higher mount on me. That's fine, even in a demonstration. Okay, so I'm establishing that bottom frame. And when I refer to bottom, my top frame's my right arm in this case, higher up. My bottom frame is the left arm, which is in contact with the mat right now. That bottom frame is wedged within my partner's leg so that he can't bring that knee under my armpit. Okay, that's kind of our first point is I don't want to allow my partner to bring their knees up too high. So second point to discuss, knees not coming up too high. Second point is my arm and elbow positioning. Okay, my right elbow, where Luke has his hand placed right now, if he were to push my elbow past his center line, there's a massive amount of back exposure, opportunities to attack arm bars, etc. So I'm creating this frame across my partner's hips with my right arm to prevent, or at least locking it in place to prevent him pushing that elbow past the center line. You can try this with your partner. Set up this strong frame across the hips, reinforced with your bottom side arm, or my left arm in this case, reinforced in place, and then have them try to push your elbow past the center line and really lock it to their hip. So I'm putting a little bit of active pressure into my partner's hips to create a little bit of friction on the gi, preventing him from moving that elbow past the center line. Right. What I'm preparing for right now is to do a nice big bridge over my left shoulder. Right. Most of the time, I'm going to bridge to the bottom side arm, so left arm in this case. And I want to take his center of gravity offline with my center of gravity. So I'm going to aim to take his center of gravity and put it outside of my hips, right? If I can get my heels in nice and tight to my butt, big bridge over top of my shoulder. I'm going to take his hips, displace them off to my left. So then there's no weight down on my hips. And while there's no weight on my hips, that's a perfect opportunity to shrimp because now I'm not encumbered by my partner's weight holding me down on the mat. So we're setting up with a good frame across the hips, getting ready to do our bridge. All right, so you'll notice a couple things here when I hit my bridge. The first and probably most important thing to note here as a beginner is that my right elbow is still glued to my partner's hip. Okay, at no point did I allow that elbow to travel past my partner's center line. If I were to do that, easy back take from my partner, probably an attack on the arm, etc. The other criteria that I'm looking at here to see whether or not I was successful in my bridge is where my partner's weight is distributed. You can see that after my bridge is complete, at the peak of my bridge here, my partner's weight is falling onto his right side. So he's got a lot of weight into his right hand, and most importantly, he's got a lot of weight into his right knee. And you can see by looking at this this still frame here that there's not much weight on his left leg. Right, his left leg is quite unweighted right now. My hips are unweighted. Most of his weight is being carried on his right knee, his right arm, and my frames, right, as opposed to on my hips. And because of that condition, I'm going to be able to hit a very easy shrimp from here. So now I'm going to set up for my shrimping motion and look to get my hips out from underneath my partner's. So this is where that idea of the jab cross comes from that I was talking about here towards the beginning. I've bridged my partner over. If he doesn't want to just fall over, he's forced to put his hand out onto the mat, take his weight and put it on his right leg. He's very biased on one side. His hips are no longer sitting on top of my hips, keeping me pinned onto the mat. That gives me a great opportunity to shrimp my hips out, taking advantage of the fact that he is unweighted on that left leg. Right, you'll notice one extra thing here is I maintain the frame on the hip and I extend that frame as I shrimp away from my partner. The purpose of this is to not allow my partner to follow me with his hips. Right? If I shrimp but I don't frame off on my partner's hips, he's able to just chase me with his hips and continue to pursue mount position. And then I'm going to be stuck in this cycle of shrimping and shrimping and shrimping and shrimping, never making any progress to escape. The purpose of the shrimp is to create this massive amount of space that's between my partner and I's hips right now. Right, I've created about 2 feet worth of space between my partner's hips and my hips. And I'm going to take advantage of that by bringing my legs in, pulling my knees towards my chest, and reguarding. All right, so a couple things to note here. When I finish that shrimp, I pull my top leg in first. This is kind of debatable, like situational, I should say, as to whether I pull the bottom leg in first or the top leg. Sometimes there's just not enough space to pull the top leg in, and obviously getting any sort of leg in front of my partner or knee or shin is going to be a step up versus just allowing them to remount. However, I found I really enjoy pulling the top leg in first, and you'll notice I pull the knee towards the chest and then I flared my leg open, almost creating what we would call a butterfly hook on my partner's leg. I feel like this is an awesome advantage because it doesn't allow my partner to smash my legs together. As a smaller grappler, I find that if I pull my bottom leg in first, my partner is able to just smash that bottom leg to the mat And now my top leg is still stuck between their legs, and they can simply just walk back over top of my leg to a either very strong passing position or back to mount. So I've found for myself personally, I've had a lot of success pulling the top leg in first, creating a butterfly hook. Now I've got an established guard or a frame in front of my partner's hips that doesn't allow them to just smash their weight back into me. Obviously, this is a personal preference thing. I've seen instructionals from great jiu-jitsu players showing both methods, pulling the bottom leg or pulling the top leg. So that's really going to be a point of experimentation. This is just what works best for me. And then you'll notice I use the top leg to frame off of my partner's hips, allowing me to pull the bottom leg back through and reestablishing an open guard position. Now, obviously, you don't have to necessarily go to an open guard from here. I could choose to pull my partner into half guard, into closed guard, stay in butterfly guard. There's many different options there. Really, it's going to be very situational where you specifically go after your escape. It's going to depend a lot on what your training partner's doing. But in a best case scenario, especially if we're just focused on a complete beginner, getting completely out from the mount, getting feet on my partner's hips, and then starting to look for grips where I can start to create some offense is a great option. Okay, so now we're looking at the cross to our jab cross here. We've already learned that if we bridge up nice and heavy, our partner's going to bias their weight on one leg. Then we have the opportunity to shrimp out, right? But as you start to work with more skilled, more experienced training partners, they're going to know this predictable movement. They're going to know that you're going to look to bridge in one direction and then shrimp your hips out, and they can counter that. So we're going to play a game with our partner between giving them the options. Like either you stop yourself from falling over from the bridge by biasing your weight on, in this case, it would be Luke's right leg, and stopping yourself from falling over, but then you're light on the back leg, the left leg in this case, and I can shrimp out. Or you stop me from shrimping by putting your weight on the back leg, but that frees up an opportunity for me to attack a knee elbow escape or a leg trap escape on the what I'll call the near side leg, which is the one that I'm looking at. I'll call the far side leg the one that's behind me, the near side leg the one that I'm looking at. So here I'm going to threaten the bridge and shrimp escape with Luke. And as I do that, he's going to bias his weight to stop my shrimp from working. Right. And you can't get caught in this blinders situation where you're just going to shrimp forever. It's very predictable. He knows that I'm going to go for a shrimp. So we'll capitalize on that. We'll attack the bridge, put his weight on the near side leg. As I go to shrimp, he'll counter that by putting his weight on the far side leg. And then we'll counter that by attacking the knee elbow escape or the leg trap escape. So you'll notice that in any situation here when I'm starting a mount escape, I've got that strong frame across the hips. My bottom elbow is wedged within my partner's knee so that he can't establish a high mount, start to separate my elbows from my body. And I've also got my right elbow glued to his hip so that he doesn't have easy access to my back. I've got my heels in tight. I think in my opinion, my right leg is a little far away from my tailbone right now. That could be a lot tighter. Maybe I adjust it in a second here when I'm not on the freeze frame, but let's be critical. So just before we get started here on the leg trap escape, I just want to note quickly that I call this a knee elbow or a leg trap escape for a reason. I would actually refer to what I'm going to show in this video as a leg trap as opposed to a knee elbow. I'd say that the leg trap is just a little bit more of a beginner-friendly version of the knee elbow. Knee elbow escape being a little bit more technical. I'll touch on some of the points that that a knee elbow involves, but as you'll see in this video, we're not doing a whole lot of technical movement with the bottom side leg, my left leg in this case. And that's just because I'm focusing on the leg trap. We're assuming that we don't have to force this escape on our partner, that they've really biased their weight on the back leg, and it's going to be quite easy for me to step over and capture the near side leg. But if you want a more advanced version of this leg trap escape, you can look up the knee elbow. There's plenty of awesome resources. Once you've gotten comfortable with the leg trap itself, you can sort of upgrade your leg trap to the knee elbow, the more technical knee elbow. And then you can start forcing this escape on people, even if you don't manage to get their weight biased. So you'll see here in a second that as I go to shrimp, my partner just lays heavy on that back leg. Well, now I'm stuck in this position where I can't shrimp my hips out. Now, the trade-off to this is that in order to continue defending my shrimping escape, my partner has to keep his weight bias on that left leg. A good jiu-jitsu player will learn how to bias things quite a bit less severely. And maybe he'll put 60% of his weight on the left leg and 40% of his weight on the right leg in this case. Um, Obviously, a beginner is going to be a little more rushed or overcommitted in their weight distribution. So in this case that I'm looking at, I'm seeing Luke putting 80% of his weight on his left leg and 20% of his weight on the near leg. This is just to illustrate what a typical response for a beginner will be when you're trying to shrimp out. They're going to go all in on defending that shrimping escape, which gives you a great opportunity to attack the near side leg for a leg trap or a knee elbow escape. So from this position, to start attacking my knee elbow escape, I'm going to take my right leg or my top side leg and step over top of my partner's leg. It's sometimes helpful if I can't, if my partner's weight is a little more evenly distributed and their knee is still close to the ground, I can use my bottom leg as a wedge. So I'll take my left foot and lift it off the mat, bringing my knee towards my elbow, creating a wedge underneath my partner's leg and moving his heel away from his body. That'll make it a little easier to step over and catch the leg against a more experienced jiu-jitsu player. In this case, we're really trying to illustrate someone who's heavily overcommitted on the back leg. There's very little weight on the near side leg, and it's going to be very simple for me to just step over, use the heel wedged against my partner's shin to pull that leg in between my legs, and then I'm just pinching the knees together. I'm not going to try and triangle my legs or anything like that. I literally just pinch the knees together. Awesome. So now that I have the leg trapped between my legs, I'm in a I'm in a 3/4 mount position where my partner is practically almost mounted, but I've moved myself a quarter of the way back towards a guard. All right. Now, if I want to establish a half guard, I need to get my partner's knee past the line of my knees. So right now his knee is closer to my hips than my knees are to my hips. So I need to move his knee past that line and trap it in between my legs. Now, this is a precarious situation because my partner is going to be looking for my back. I've essentially put my partner's leg into a hooking position. And if you know about back control yet, we'll talk about that in future videos if you don't. But if you understand back control, I've essentially given my partner a hook to take my back. And if I am not diligent and disciplined with that top side arm, my partner can get back exposure here and then simply just sit through to my back because I've essentially provided him with a hook. Right. So as I go for this transition, I need to be really disciplined with that top side frame to prevent my partner from getting access to my back. So I'll keep that frame glued to my partner's hips, maintain my elbow on the outside of his center line, glued to that far side hip. Right? And then from here, I'm going to start a motion of turning to the opposite side. If I trap my partner's leg in between my legs right now, it's sort of a useless position because I'm playing essentially a backwards version of half guard. I want to get to my right side in this case, rotating all the way to my opposite hip while I trap the knee to establish a proper, we'll say, quote unquote, half guard position. Especially for a beginner, we just want to stick to the absolute basics. So how do I do this? I'm going to bring my heels in and start to lift with my legs and my hips, using my hips to lift my partner's knee off the mat. I only need to bring that knee off the mat like a half an inch so that I can start to pressure it between my legs as I roll through to the opposite side. This might take a few little shrimps, a couple different hip movements to get there. Don't feel like it has to be one smooth movement. This can be a series of small inch by inch movements rotating to the opposite side. But I should land in the opposite side with my partner's knee completely trapped between my legs and past the line of my knees. You'll also notice that as I rotate through, I'm going to take my left arm and reach for an underhook on my partner so that I could be immediately effective and offensive from a half guard position. When I reach for that underhook, I'm going to turn my palm up to the ceiling and weight my partner's shoulder. Right? This prevents him from easily being able to just smash me back down to the mat. So you can practice this with your partner. It's a strange little adjustment. I learned it from an awesome black belt a few years ago. If my palm is down towards the mat when I have that underhook, very easy for them to just smash me back into the mats. But if I turn that palm up, very difficult. So you can see here that underhook that I'm talking about with my palm up to the ceiling. And I'm putting weight on my partner's shoulder. In a perfect world, I'm going to keep his shoulder lower than his elbow. All right, that makes it very difficult for my partner to posture up and pressure back into me to smash me flat from my half guard. You'll also notice that I've shrimped my hips just a little bit out from underneath my partner. So I'm not directly underneath Luke, but I'm more adjacent to him. So then from this position, if I want to play half guard, I'm set up in a good position. I could start to attack a back take here. I could start to attack the dogfight position, what have you. But if I want to go back to something a little more secure as a beginner, something that prevents my partner from moving around and really puts me in a position where I can be completely offensive and my partner doesn't have very many offensive options, unlike half guard, where my partner can potentially pass quite easily if I'm not set up well, I'll put my partner back into closed guard. I need to attach myself to my partner's upper body as I retreat the legs from underneath my partner. So I'm going to use what's called a shoulder crunch. Right. As a beginner, don't focus too much on the specifics here, but I'm going to gable grip behind my partner's shoulder and pull that shoulder in tight to my chest, keeping his elbow above that shoulder line if possible. Right. Then I bring my bottom knee, so my right knee in this case, to the pocket of my partner's hip. This is going to prevent him just stepping over my leg and passing my guard very simply. I use that knee in the pocket of the hip to extend my partner's body open, right, creating a lot of limb extension. And then I rotate back to the left hip again. Once I'm on the left hip, that makes it very easy to clear my right leg to throw around my partner's back into closed guard position. Okay, it's very important that I do this sort of serpentine motion back and forth between my hips. When I'm under mount, I started on my left hip. I rotated to my right hip to get a half guard position. And then as I go back to the closed guard position, I'm coming all the way back to my left hip to make it easy for me to free my foot. If you're having difficulties freeing your leg and throwing it around your partner's back, it's likely just a little bit more rotation required from the hips, and you'll be able to easily free that foot. If you're a little more flexible, you don't need as much rotation from the hips, but certainly if you're just new to jiu-jitsu, you don't have huge mobility in your hips, try to get all the way onto what would be my left hip in this case to really make it easy to pull that right leg out, throw it around your partner's back, and now you're in a very offensive position in closed guard, can immediately start on the attack. So that concludes what I believe is a very strong combo for beginners to start learning. Just this idea of distributing your partner's body weight between their two knees. So you're threatening putting their weight on one side, taking advantage of the lack of weight on the other leg. Getting the weight off of your hips, displacing it to the sides as opposed to just lifting it up and down. And then, very importantly, maintaining that frame on the hips to prevent your partner from getting easy arm bars, easy arm attacks, and easily taking the back. The other thing to note is if I maintain my partner sitting on top of me comfortably and I'm not bridging and displacing their weight side to side, in a jiu-jitsu context, they're going to look for cross chokes, Ezekiel chokes, etc. on the neck if I'm just laying there on my back. So a good rule of thumb as a beginner, just keep displacing your partner's body weight side to side. Right? I oftentimes show the example that if that's all I do, just side to side, bridging this way, shrimping, bridging this way, shrimping, going back and forth, if that's all I do, at a very bare minimum from a beginner perspective, at least I'm not allowing them to start attacks. I'm keeping good frames so they can't attack my arms. I keep my elbow glued to the hip so that they can't take my back. And I'm using bridges back and forth to keep their hands on the mat. They're always checking their balance. So they're not gaining any sort of inertia on their offensive cycle, right? And that's really like important as a beginner to think, okay, if this person's a lot more experienced than I am, I'm probably going to have a hard time escaping, but at a bare minimum, I can keep their hands on the mat and prevent them from attacking me. And then hopefully, as you're working that defensive cycle of putting their hands on the mat, distributing their weight back and forth, you find an opportunity to create some space through a shrimp, or you see that their near side leg is light and you can trap a leg to start working on your knee elbow escape or leg trap escape back to half guard or closed guard position. So I hope this was helpful. We'll continue on with top mount position, how we can start to build some of that inertia from top mount and get our offensive cycle going so our partner doesn't have the opportunity to escape.